Well, good morning and welcome to another Survival Skills Elevenses broadcast. This is number 75. When I started doing this back in March, I really didn't expect to be delivering quite as many of these webcasts. So thank you to everybody who has watched any of these shows, and welcome along if you are here today. So yes, I'm Kevin Williams, and for the next 30 minutes or so, I'll be taking you through some news, views, and some better biking tips as well. So what have we got for you today? It's a fairly packed show, actually. The first piece of news is that the insurance merger between Ardonagh and Bennetts has been reversed. The Financial Conduct Authority has also warned insurance companies generally to stop second-year price hikes. A police dog has nicked a bike theft suspect. And as one trial is suspended, MPs are calling for the e-scooters that we're starting to see on roads to be legalised. And finally, I'll round up with a item on seeing in the rain and keeping your visor clear in the current weather. So grab your brew and biscuit and settle down for the next 30 minutes or so. Good morning, Sue, by the way. Good to see you again. Right, okay, so let's kick in with the big news first of all. News broke in the last couple of days that the merger of the Ardonagh Group, the name behind Swinton and Carroll Nash, and Bennetts Motorcycle Services, has been reversed. The merger, which took place back in February, Ardonagh paid 26 million for the Bennetts insurance name. Combined, it would have made the UK's largest company by far, because they are already the three biggest motorcycle insurance businesses, and the new giant would have absolutely dwarfed the remaining competition. So perhaps not so surprisingly, the deal fairly promptly attracted the attention of the Competent Markets Authority, the CMA, and they began an investigation in August, citing higher prices, less choice, and worse services for motorcyclists across the UK as the reason for that investigation. Now, Ardonagh released a press release at the time saying that they'd done everything in accordance with guidance, but the CMA announced earlier the week that they'd actually accepted a proposal for Ardonagh to sell Bennetts in order to reverse the purchase. And in a statement that came out, the watchdog outlined that the move should, in principle, be capable of remedying the competition concerns identified, and that they would now basically go on to consider the detailed aspects of the proposed remedy. And if that proposal is accepted, then Ardonagh will have a fixed period within which to sell Bennetts to a CMA-approved purchaser. The deadline of November 25th this year has been set for the CMA to make a final decision on whether to accept this proposal. So it's not yet a done deal, and they will consult publicly, they say, in the next weeks to come. Now, Ardonagh themselves have issued their own statement confirming this decision to divest themselves of Bennetts, noting that its subsidiary, the Atlanta Investment Holdings C Limited, had exchanged contracts back in February, and that Ardonagh had voluntarily notified the CMA of the merger. And their CEO, Ian Donaldson, he says that we are disappointed with the CMA's phase one findings. And he continues, rather than enter into a long, burdensome and expensive phase two inquiry, we have decided that an appropriate course of action for Atlanta is to divest Bennetts in order to focus on continuing to provide excellent choice and service to motorcycle riders, and to provide clarity for both Atlanta and Bennetts moving forward. And he says, we remain committed to delivering great value services to customers and will now concentrate our efforts on organic growth with our Carroll Nash and Swinton bike brands. what am I thinking? Thoughts on this? Well, basically putting most of the eggs into a single basket belonging to one seller is never likely to be a good idea for customers. It's never proven so in any other field in the past. And the implication of that statement about a long, burdensome and expensive inquiry suggests to me, at least, that Ardonagh think there would be a good chance that they would lose the inquiry. So what's organic growth all about? Well, basically, the implication is that they will compete head on with the other insurance companies for new business and renewals. And if that means lower premiums, or at least a reversal in the current trend for soaring rates, that would be good news for all of us. So there we go. That's the Ardonagh, Carol Nash, Swinton, Bennetts deal put on hold for the time being. Now, don't forget, you can catch up with Elevenses on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. Something between 15 minutes and 30 minutes is the length of the show, depending on how much I've got to talk about. So put that date in your diary and be ready for number 76, show number 76 on Wednesday. Now, the second insurance item that I wanted to talk about was reported in Motorcycle News earlier this week, and that's about the insurance companies being under fire generally from another angle. The Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, has put out proposals which MCN says would rid the insurance market of second-year price hikes that favour new customers over existing policyholders. And this probably won't come as a huge surprise to anybody who has tried to renew insurance, as I did back in end of May, beginning of June. After an analysis of the market, the FCA has accused insurance of complex and opaque price practices, resulting in price rises, while adding that firms target price increases on consumers who are less likely to switch and use practice that make it harder for people to leave. Well, I certainly had huge problems renewing my motorcycle insurance simply because I wanted insurance as an instructor, and the problem was that I live in an area where there are no garages, and even though the bike's actually on a private piece of property, it's not in the road, that was enough to make it almost impossible to get insurance. So the FCA's new rules would basically make it obligatory that a renewing customer would pay no more than a new customer. And that would be, obviously, that would help enormously with this problem of having to sort of juggle figures. Now, if you've got time to spend a couple of days going around all the insurance deals, you can often get a much better deal if you're prepared to switch. But if you have special circumstances like I have as an instructor, you're basically trapped in a policy which then goes up and up and up. So that will basically mean that insurers can set their prices as they like, but what they can't do is add extra at renewal time. And the only changes would be in line with the risk. So that's the FCA say this would lead to increased competition and would save consumers no less than 3.7 billion over 10 years. That's obviously a fairly big hit to the insurance industry. And not surprisingly, the Director General of the Association of British Insurers, Hugh Evans, is not entirely in agreement. He says that they do agree that the insurance markets do not work as well as they should, but he claims that insurers and brokers have actually begun to tackle the issue of excessive price differences between new and existing customers through an industry initiative that's seen over 8.5 million pricing interventions across home and motor insurance worth 641 million. Well, you'll probably, if your maths is anything like mine, you'll probably notice that 641 million is not actually 3.7 billion. So clearly, excuse me, the industry doesn't want to go quite as far as the regulator. And of course, there's the usual threat that The FCA recognises that the intervention will probably lead to some customers paying higher prices as they benefit from significant new business discounts. But so if you're the sort of person, MCN says, who shops around every year, you might lose out. But I suspect for the majority of us, we'll just add to a sort of slightly more level playing field. And again, the proposals are open to the public to share views before January. Excuse me. Too much talking again this morning. I've been online delivering an online presentation already this morning, so lots of talking. Don't forget, if you have a comment or a question, feel free to add yours and I'll get back to you at the end of the show. Okay, so what else? Police in Sheffield have used a new tactic to nab nuisance riders around the streets, and excuse me, the hero of this particular press release is police dog Luna, there seen in the photo. Luna was part of a team used to pursue a couple of riders on a stolen motorcycle. After the riders abandoned the bike after riding on pavements, footpaths and across parks during a conventional police pursuit, they abandoned the bike and they dumped their brightly coloured helmets at the same time and attempted just to blend in with the background, as it were. But that's where Luna came in. Luna was then released and promptly tracked down one of the suspects, who was arrested at the scene. So hats off there to Sheffield police for thinking a little bit outside the box. Good news. Anything that reduces the number of bike thefts and general sort of nuisance behaviour on motorcycles has to be good for motorcycling generally. Okay, so next story. I won't say I told you so, but the e-scooter trials have hit significant problems. One trial, which saw 200 e-scooters placed on the streets of Birmingham and Coventry, was supposed to last 12 months, but Coventry pulled the plug on their half of the trial after just 5 days. The authority has said that the e-scooters, which are provided by a Swedish company called Voi, have been extremely popular, and they have pointed out that more than 5,000 rides have been taken up. And a statement says, the initial take-up's been encouraging, but we need to ensure the safety of all the people using the city centre is protected and that e-scooters are used in the proper way, hence our decision to pause the pilot until systems are improved. A Voi spokesman said that they regret the decision, but the company is looking forward to resuming the service with enhanced measures in place to address the early observations of the trial. So what are the reasons? Well, basically, they're exactly the same problems that have been found in other countries which have launched these e-scooter hire services. That generally the people using them are not all obeying the rules. And the big problems have been entirely predictable. They're being ridden on pavements and they're being ridden in pedestrian areas and they're being abandoned at random. Last week, for example, Northamptonshire police said they had dealt with nearly 60 incidents involving e-scooters in just a single day. And the offences that they recorded included riding on the pavement, riding through no entry signs, having multiple people on one scooter, and children using the vehicles. One significant problem is that scooters are also being abandoned here and there and everywhere, and obviously that makes them a trip hazard, particularly for sight-impaired pedestrians. Not surprisingly, the National Federation of the Blind has called for these e-scooter trials to be cancelled immediately. However, to put the problems into perspective, in Northampton, 6,000 people have signed up for the scheme, and they've been used for 40,000 rides. 80,000 kilometres have been covered using these scooters in less than 3 weeks, and that's really quite a significant mileage. Now, Northampton Councillor Jason Smithers says that all the scooters used in the trial have mechanisms as standard that you won't find in an off-the-shelf item, and that includes geofencing and Internet of Things technology, so speeds can be controlled and the VOI response team can be alerted if a scooter is tipped. And basically what that means is that they go looking for them when they are left lying on the ground. He also points out that the scooters incorporate front and rear lights, dual brakes and belts, something you won't necessarily find on a sort of over-the-counter scooter. And he goes on to say that they're also looking at installing docking bays in some areas of Northampton, and the VOI team is also investigating ways of improving matters themselves. For example, by adding braille and sound alerts to tipped scooters. Now, I'm not quite sure how braille will help somebody identify the fact that they're about to trip over a scooter, but at least the fact that it's if it's creating a sound alert, that could help. The MPs, though, they want to take everything a step further, and a cross-party Commons Transport Select Committee has been sitting on this matter, and what they have found is that they believe that scooters should actually be legalised to use on British roads and advertised as a greener alternative to cars for short journeys. Now, the system as it is at the moment is that currently these privately owned e-scooters are banned for use anywhere in the UK except on private land. Now, clearly, we're bolting the stable door after the horses well and truly trotted off down the road and disappeared from sight here, because there are thousands of the things in use all over the UK. London, they're everywhere. So the idea that the MPs are calling for robust enforcement to stop people using them on pavements, which they said was dangerous and antisocial and an impediment to pedestrians and people with disabilities, yes, somehow we do need to do that, but we also need to think about how to fit them into the existing vehicle framework. Now, one of the problems is that, as we talked about, the abandoning these scooters everywhere is a trip hazard, but arguably taking these scooters out of the hands of rental companies and wouldn't only result in longer term savings to users, because the rental charges aren't cheap. I looked into them, but it would also mean much more responsible use by the e-scooter rider, who's actually paid good money for this thing. Just as your people abandon rental bicycles just about anywhere, people don't do the same with their own bike or scooter. At least they're not likely to abandon it in the middle of the pavement. Right now, the whole framework issue is a bit of a muddle. As things stand at the moment, the rented e-scooters are restricted to 15 miles per hour, which is the same speed at which the motor on an electrically assisted bike cuts out, and they can use cycle lanes. But not all the scooters on sale adhere to those rules. There are some pretty, some of these things are capable of doing 30 odd miles per hour. Nor do you need to use a helmet, even though these things are, as Colin Brown said in the interview the other day, technically powered two-wheelers. But you do require a provisional license to use one, which again is something of a conflict. But unlike the electrically assisted bicycle, which is only assisted, you still have to pedal to make it work. So there is a sort of a complete muddle of rules and interpretations of how things should work there, I think. One organisation has called for education, and a roads infrastructure actually supports road users that aren't in cars. Now, again, that sounds great in theory, but ironically, if you're promoting e-scooters as a last mile solution, perhaps the idea is that you take one out of your parked car boot, or you jump out of a taxi carrying one and ride off on it, or maybe you've taken it onto a train and you jump off the train and again off you go to your place of work. Then wholesale pedestrianizations of city centres is actually counterproductive, and we need to find a way of integrating these things with pedestrians. If you just stop people from going anywhere except by walking, there will be people who cycle on pavements. It's long been a problem with cyclists using cycles on pavements. Vast majority of the cyclists follow the rules, but every now and again you'll meet one who isn't. And the same thing is bound to happen with these e-scooters. So there needs to be a wholesale rethink on this, I believe. Okay, so What else to talk about? Well, don't forget, if you want to catch up with the show, you can find it on YouTube at my YouTube channel, which is Survival Skills UK. You can also, of course, catch up here later on Facebook when it goes live. And the show will also go up on my Ko-fi page. Now, if you are over there and you can find this show in about 30 minutes time, it'll go up live. I've also put up in just the last couple of days 8 new posts from my Facebook Tips on Tuesday series from 2016. So that makes around 200, and I think it's around about 225 articles now are up on there from 214 up to 216. 216 is work in progress, lots more to go, as you can imagine. You can access all that content for £3 for a month, or you can become a subscriber with a regular commitment, and you'll not only get that, but you'll get additional training content as well. So everything over there on Ko-fi, these shows are available for free, but you can also access that supporter and subscriber content for a very modest price indeed. Go have a look and see what you can find. There are some free articles for you to read. Now, one of the sort of things that I will be talking about is seeing in the rain. Now, somewhere here, he says, hopefully, he has a picture of, there it is, a gadget called a V-wipe. Now, if you looked out the window over the last couple of days, you're probably wondering whether, in fact, a motorcycle is an appropriate means of transport, or whether Noah's Ark would be better. Certainly, I think it's been very, very wet here in London, and I haven't thought about going anywhere near the bike. But sometimes we have to ride in the rain. And how do we keep our visor clear of water? Well, as usual, about this time of year, there's always discussion about this. People mention the V-wipe. Basically, it's a windscreen wiper on your finger. It's a piece of flexible rubber, and you slide that rubbery thing over the glove, and you draw it across the visor. The idea is you put it on your clutch hand, and so obviously you can keep hold of the throttle and the front brake. They've been around for 40 odd years. You can see one innovation, and that's the lanyard, which you slip over your wrist first to stop the thing falling off. I think I probably had one of the first V-wipes that came out. It was a brand new gadget at the time, and I think it stayed on my glove for approximately 30 seconds before it fell off. So the lanyard actually secures it on your finger. Any other problems with them? Well, one thing is that that water has to go somewhere, and of course, when you're wiping that water over your visor, the water runs down the V-wipe and runs onto the glove. So you tend to get a soggy forefinger very quickly using the V-wipe. But my big concern from using them as a courier many years ago was that anything that you drag over your visor at regular intervals is going to scratch the surface. Now, the water that hits your visor, if it was only rain, it would be clean. And as long as you already have a clean visor, then all you would be doing would be wiping the visor clear of that water. But unfortunately, of course, as we ride on the road, some of the water that hits the visor is actually spray that is kicked up from vehicles ahead of us. And that spray contains tiny particles of grit. That gets on the visor. Now you wipe your visor and you're basically dragging those particles of grit across your piece of plastic in front of you. Now, if you look at the labels on visors, you'll see that they're labeled as anti-scratch. Now, what that means is that they're not scratch-proof. Even glass isn't scratch-proof, but they are scratch-resistant. They have a hard coating on, which is designed to not as I say, not prevent scratches, but at least make it a bit more difficult to scratch them. But if you are taking a tiny piece of silica or something, a piece of sand effectively across your visor, you will leave a scratch. It will go through this anti-scratch layer. And then what happens, of course, is the problem at night is that you get this beautiful starburst effect as headlights come towards you. Back in the old days, when the visors weren't anti-scratch, generally speaking, I used to have to change them about every 2 or 3 months in the winter. I'd probably get through an entire summer with one visor. Now, with those anti-scratch coatings, they can last for several years. In fact, I've just retired a flip front helmet with about 5 years use on it and bought a new one, and it was on the second visor. So that's pretty good actual average for the length of life, given that I'm riding most days of the week. But I don't use the V-Wipe anymore. So what do I use? Well, the answer is I simply use Mr. Sheen furniture polish. Where did I get this tip from? Well, it came from a guy called Peter Gidman that I used to know years ago through one of the bike forums. He was actually a helmet technician for Arai, who worked in the UK. So his job was to go out and service in the service truck at places like Donington Park and Silverstone, and he would service the helmets not only for British Superbike riders, but he would also be there when the World Superbike and MotoGP events were on. And his tip for riding in the rain for MotoGP was a layer of Mr. Sheen sprayed on and then carefully polished into the surface with a clean anti-scratch cloth, something like this one here, a microfiber cloth. So the visor starts clean, it's already been washed, the Mr. Sheen gets sprayed on, and then it's polished on till you can't see it anymore. And then what you're left with is a layer of wax. And wax, as you probably know, repels water. If you look at a waxed table and you drip some water on it, you'll find it produces a nice discrete bead rather than the water spreading. So what happens, of course, is you're riding, you've got the wind blowing on your visor, and the beads of water are actually swept off by the speed of your progress. Now, it works better at high speed. Around town, it's not so good. But even in city centre riding, you'll find that if you just sort of turn your head slightly from side to side, you'll get enough of a wind blast to take the water off the visor. And if you're stationary, a lot of it will just run down anyway. If you don't clean the visor, then what happens is you tend to get oil on the visor, and that tends to make the water spread rather than bead up. So does it damage the visor? That's a question that a lot of people ask. Peter Gidman says no, that it's a water-based polish. So although there are propellants in there, there aren't propellants that will damage the anti-scratch coating. There are other treatments which are intended for glass, which can damage that anti-scratch coating. Of course, you can go down to your local motorcycle shop and you can buy little squirty cans of Visor Treatment, which aim to do exactly the same thing. But as far as I understand, they are based on exactly the same principle. They produce a wax-like chemical which lands on the visor and again makes the water bead up and run off. A can of Mr. Sheen's somewhere around about £1, and it will last you a year. The visor treatments, you'll get a much smaller little spray can or a pot for the for probably 5 or 6 times the amount of money. So up to you, take your choice. But the one thing that I would advise you not to do is wipe the visor with anything while you're riding. I'm afraid really I can't actually recommend the V-wipes unless you really do want to change your visor at regular intervals. Anything else? If I do get the visor covered in crap, and it does happen when you get all that spray off the road, then basically I just stop and I will clean the visor and I will re-polish it. For that reason, I normally carry one of these Atlantis scratch sponges that you can get in zip seal packets, and that is already pre-treated with sort of some Mr. Sheen spray. So basically unzip the zippy bag, take the sponge out, clean the visor properly, and then polish it off again with a piece of this kind of microfiber cloth, which I just happen to have sitting in a pocket. And then I've got a nice clean visor, and again it's freshly treated with wax, so all the water runs off. There's one other advantage as well. You'll also find that things like bugs, which will stick to the visor in the summer, they also come off a lot easier because they hit the visor, but they are on top of the wax polished surface. So when you clean the visor, you'll find those bugs will just literally lift off with a damp cloth. If you don't clean the visor with wax, you'll find those bugs actually really dry into the surface, and then you have to kind of work hard to get them off, and that alone is enough to scratch your visor. All right, okay, I've talked more than enough on the topic, so I'm going to call an end to today's show. Don't forget, you've been watching Elevenses live. You can always head over to my Lulu page, there it is, and if you want something to read, if you want to find out a few more tips in my books, you can choose from Survival Skills, which is the DIY guide to better riding, advanced riding, Tarmac Tactics, which covers all sorts of riding conditions, including riding in rubbish weather like we have today, gives you all sorts of really practical helping hand. And if you want to think about your riding a little bit more, then there's the Mind Over Motorcycle book as well. So, okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much indeed again for tuning in. You've been watching Elevenses, and astonishingly, as I say, this is the 75th show I've been doing. So we'll be back on Wednesday at 11, and hopefully I'll see some of you then. Bye for now.